Hi, Chris. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here with us today as we celebrate our 30th International Noise Awareness Day. Chris is a journalist. He writes about science, health, technology, and education, and he is the author of a new book called Clamor: How Noise Took Over the World and How We Can Take It Back. So, Chris, welcome. Uh,
Thanks, Nancy.
Thanks so much for being here as we mark International Noise Awareness Day. And let me start by saying I loved Clamor. I absolutely loved the book. And so I really want to start out with why Clamor? What inspired you to write this book?
First of all, thank you very much for having me on here to talk about this. Uh, the why of this book changed a fair amount during the writing of it. My interest in noise began when I was writing a magazine article for the Boston Globe Sunday magazine about a public health researcher here in Boston who was focused on noise. And I was immediately taken by this pervasive yet inscrutable pollutant in our lives that has tremendous impacts on us from hearing to cardiovascular health to our mental well-being to the natural environment. And yet this is a pollutant that nobody can really agree on the definition of. Just as I got the book proposal and the reporting underway, COVID hit. And that put everything into perspective. It also put everything on hold for about 18 months. And during that time, I started to think more and more about what this particular question when it came to battling noise, and that is, what should be our goal? And I think when you talk to people about this, sometimes they'll say, well, we want quiet. We want a quieter world. And as you recall, during COVID, cities shut down, roads emptied out, businesses closed, so did schools, people stayed home. There was a hush that descended in many places, and it was measured about 4 to 6 decibels. So we had achieved a quieter world. It had taken kind of a global catastrophe to do it. And I will say throughout this book, and quiet is a very precious thing. I feel like it's undervalued. I feel like it's worth pursuing. But I felt as a singular goal, we needed to have a broader idea of what we wanted from our soundscapes, that quiet was not enough. The soundscape approach generally is to think about all of the sounds in an environment, whether they are a certain decibel threshold or not, whether we like them or don't, and to think about how they impact the people in that environment. So think about a hospital. Is the mix of sounds in this hospital making it easier or harder for clinicians to do their work? Is it making it easier or harder for patients to get their rest and heal? These sorts of questions can be asked, and they can be asked in a proactive way rather than traditional noise control, which often is waiting around for things to get too loud and then dealing with that loudness exclusively. So that's kind of the shift in approach that I argue for in this book.
I have to say one of the parts of the book that was the most relatable to me was the part that you talked about the cognitive overload or the signal overload, and all of the beeps in our life, right? Coming from the washing machine, coming from the microwave, we can all relate to that. And if you could talk a little bit about that kind of noise, because those noises aren't loud enough to cause damage to hearing. Like if you're using the traditional approach with decibels, but they're certainly creating stress. And if you could talk about those kinds of impacts of the, as you call it, the signal overload.
Yeah, I think that sometimes people talk about those sorts of noises, the online cacophony, if you will, all the beeps and notifications that are coming our way now as noise in a metaphorical way, but I think it goes beyond that. I like to think about if you define noise not just as unwanted sounds, but unwanted signals, it can kind of help join those two together in terms of what they do to us cognitively and what they do to us in terms of our stress loads, our ability to, you know, focus and stay asleep when we're asleep. Any book that I've read about, you know, the importance of quiet and silence, when they talk about noise, they are focusing on the noise that shatters our attention spans. That's the noise that they are trying to find an antidote for. There is a movement, I guess you could call it, called calm technology, which was started way back in the early 90s. The internet was still very new. We certainly didn't have smartphones bugging us all the time. Two folks at a research center in Palo Alto that was connected to the Xerox company, you know, they said we're heading towards a future of continuous connectivity, and if computers are going to be in our lives all the time, they better know when to shut up, essentially. So I think, you know, when we think about seeking quiet, the hardest thing may be to and I don't want to get too metaphysical here, but to get to the quiet mind, where, you know, you may find that taking a walk along a path in your local park near a kind of a fairly loud waterway might give you more sense of quiet than sitting alone in your living room scrolling through your social media feeds, I think.
You also spent some time talking about what's very near and dear to the work that we do at CHC and the impact of noise on hearing. That is one of the goals of International Noise Awareness Day, to educate the public about the impact of noise on hearing and health and the quality of life. And you talked about hearing is the one thing that really connects us to other people, which is true. And how hearing is also very vulnerable to loud noises. And you talked about how the damage actually occurs earlier, sooner than something that you can measure on an audiogram, and it extends beyond that. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Have you ever been in a situation where someone says, you know, I can hear you, but I can't understand you? They can sense the sound, but it's like a pixelated image. And the researchers call this hidden hearing loss. This trouble that we often experience before an audiogram will register anything wrong with our hearing, where we have trouble understanding people in noisy situations. It takes an incredible amount of interaction between what we're hearing and our brains, you know, the role of attention to kind of focus on what one person is saying while another person is also talking, is an incredible achievement of our hearing system, and it can be thrown off even if all of the sounds are still available to us through our ears. So that's that was the research about the hidden hearing loss, which I think is something that can happen with exposures to sound well below what is typically, you know, listed as the danger zone of I think about 85 or so decibels.
What do you hope the readers will take away from Clamor?
Maybe three things. I think starting with that we should do a better job of taking care of our ears. The scary statistics of how many people have incurred hearing loss from too much noise have been around for a while. People, I think, have a general sense of it, but they are not moved by it. but I think that's changing. And I think just like SPF, where, 30 years ago, people didn't really use it. Now, parents won't let their kids leave the house in the summer without slathering them head to toe in it. It's part of all sorts of premium health and beauty products. It is no regulations needed there. And I think you see that happening with protecting our hearing, and I think that's important. I think the second thing I'm hoping people take away is to realize that, we have power as consumers, not just to complain about noise, but to reward those companies and businesses that show that they do care about the sound environments that we're in. I think that's important. And the third thing I think is I hope that some of these readers will realize that they are actually in an excellent place to improve their soundscape. There were some researchers, cardiologists at Mass General Hospital who did a study about the impacts of stress on heart health. And one of the stressors that they looked at was noise. And noise, just like many other stressors, ratcheted up the incidence of cardiovascular disease. And they didn't stop there. These cardiologists added onto their paper recommendations for the American Heart Association and the other bodies that do clinical guidance for assessing heart disease risk, to include noise exposure as one of their risks. You have architects who have now started to look into not just building green buildings, but building healthy buildings. And healthy buildings includes proper ventilation, it includes clean water, but it also includes soundscapes that are not going to damage our hearing or pile on chronic stress. So I think hopefully readers will see that this issue is something that they do have some power in.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful because you do empower the reader with, first, as you said, to really think about hearing, and hopefully I'm encouraged to hear that through your research you're seeing that the shift is starting to change, that people are actually understanding the impact of noise and hearing and taking some control and doing something about it, but also that we think about our soundscape and that we have the power to do something about it. So, Chris, I want to thank you for joining us on the 30th International Noise Awareness Day. Thank you for sharing Clamor. It is really a powerful reminder that sound matters and that we can take charge and do something about the sound in our lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. It's been a pleasure.